Tensions between the United States and Iran have reached unprecedented levels, and the consequences are beginning to reach countries thousands of kilometers away, including India. The United States has lost more than 20 aircraft. Billions of dollars worth of military hardware have been destroyed or disabled. And yet, despite all that firepower, America has failed to force open this critical strait against a middle power like Iran. This is not just a military story. This is an energy story. Through that narrow strait passes roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. Every day, tankers carrying millions of barrels of crude oil travel through those waters on their way to Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. When those waters are disrupted, the entire global energy market shakes, and India, a country of 1.4 billion people, one of the world's fastest growing economies, and one of the largest importers of crude oil, is watching all of this with extremely careful eyes. Because India has seen this story before. In 1973, when the OPEC oil embargo crippled economies. In 1979, when the Iranian Revolution sent prices skyrocketing. In 1990, when the Gulf War disrupted supplies. And every time, countries that depended entirely on imported oil paid an enormous price. India does not want to pay that price again, which is why in 2026, India is doing something no other country is attempting at this scale. It is building all of its energy pillars at the same time. Most countries depend on one or two critical energy pillars. India is trying to build all of them simultaneously. That is rare, that is deliberate, and that is the story this documentary is going to tell. You'd genuinely be shocked to see how well India is managing this entire situation behind the scenes. We are going to uncover every single layer of the strategy India is quietly putting into place and how all of these moves are connected. Once you see how India is balancing everything at the same time, the scale of this strategy becomes genuinely remarkable. And you may want to stay till the end, because if PM Modi's recent appeal to Indians made you wonder why the government is suddenly talking about saving fuel, reducing gold purchases, cutting foreign spending, and protecting dollars, we're going to decode exactly why that ask was made, whether it is justified, and how it connects to India's much bigger energy strategy. But first, let's begin with one of the most controversial and important parts of India's strategy. Part 1. The oil gamble. When the Strait of Hormuz began facing serious disruption in 2025 and into 2026, most Western governments scrambled to respond militarily. India made a different calculation. Instead of depending on the strait remaining open, India asked a harder question. What happens if it does not? That question drove a series of strategic decisions that reveal a country quietly building one of the most sophisticated energy security architectures in the modern world. The first pillar was Russian oil. After Russia's February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Western nations imposed severe sanctions on Russian oil exports. Many countries complied. India did not, at least not in the way the West expected. India saw an opportunity. With Russian oil being shunned by Western buyers, the price collapsed. Russian crude was being sold at steep discounts to the international benchmark. At various points between 2022 and 2026, India was purchasing Russian oil at discounts ranging from $10 to $25 per barrel below market rates. For a country that imports more than 85% of its crude oil needs, that discount is not a rounding error. It is billions of dollars in savings every year. By 2023 to 24, Russia had become India's single largest source of crude oil, supplying more than 40% of total crude imports. India had completely restructured its oil import basket in a matter of 2 years. This was not impulsive. This was strategic. India's foreign policy has long operated under the doctrine of strategic autonomy, decisions based on national interest, not bloc loyalty. Buying discounted Russian oil was a textbook application of that doctrine. But India knew that Russian oil could not be the permanent answer. Supply chains depend on geopolitics, and geopolitics can change overnight. That is why the second pillar was Middle East balancing. Even as India was buying more Russian oil, it simultaneously maintained strong diplomatic ties with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait. India has not abandoned these relationships. It has simply added more options. No single dependency is safe in a world where geography, politics, and military conflicts can disrupt supply lines without warning. India is engineering a future where no single disruption can bring the entire energy system to its knees. Part 2. The Reserve Strategy. While all of this was happening at the import level, India was simultaneously building something underground: strategic petroleum reserves. The idea is straightforward. Store oil when it is cheap and available, then use it during emergencies when prices spike or supply chains are disrupted. The United States built its Strategic Petroleum Reserve after the 1973 oil embargo, precisely because it did not want to be caught unprepared again. India operates 3 underground rock cavern facilities: at Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh, Mangaluru in Karnataka, and Padur in Karnataka, storing approximately 5.33 million metric tons of crude oil, roughly equivalent to 13 days of the country's total oil consumption. Additional facilities at Chandakol in Odisha and Padur Phase 2 in Karnataka will expand this buffer further. When oil prices spiked due to Middle East tensions in 2025 to 26, India was not caught entirely off guard. Its reserves provided a buffer while negotiations continued, but strategic reserves are only a short-term cushion. What India really needed was a long-term answer, and that answer was not going to come from oil fields. It was going to come from atoms. Part 3. The Breakthrough. On a quiet campus in Kalpakkam, Tamil Nadu, in April 2026, Indian scientists achieved something that the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and dozens of other advanced nations had attempted and failed to do. India's prototype Fast Breeder Reactor reached criticality. Criticality is the moment when a nuclear chain reaction becomes self-sustaining. The United States, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Japan all attempted fast breeder reactor programs and abandoned them. France shut down its Super Phoenix in 1997 after repeated technical problems and billions spent. India did not give up. The prototype fast breeder reactor at Kalpakkam is entirely indigenous, designed, built, and operated by Indian scientists without importing the core technology from any foreign country. When it reached criticality in April 2026, it was proof that India could achieve in nuclear science what wealthier and more industrialized nations could not. China is developing its own fast breeder reactor program, but reports suggest it is based on Russian designs. India's is completely indigenous. A technology built at home cannot be sanctioned away or restricted by another country's political decisions. To understand why this matters so deeply, one has to understand India's 3-stage nuclear program, one of the most ambitious energy strategies ever conceived by any nation. Part 4. The Master Plan. India's 3-stage nuclear program was conceived in the 1950s by Homi Bhabha, the father of India's nuclear program. It was designed with one fundamental insight: India does not have large uranium reserves, but it has enormous thorium reserves. Therefore, India's nuclear strategy had to be built around eventually using thorium as its primary fuel. The plan has 3 distinct stages. Stage 1 uses pressurized heavy water reactors that run on uranium. These generate electricity and produce plutonium as a byproduct. Most countries treated plutonium as nuclear waste. India treated it as fuel for Stage 2. Stage 2 uses fast breeder reactors, like the one that just reached criticality at Kalpakkam in April 2026. These reactors use plutonium from Stage 1 as fuel. Here is the extraordinary part. Fast breeder reactors produce more plutonium than they consume, along with a valuable material called uranium-233. A reactor that produces more fuel than it burns is science fact, and India has now proven it can build one indigenously. Stage 3 will use thorium-based reactors. These use thorium, which India has in abundance, combined with Stage 2 plutonium to generate electricity and produce uranium-233, which feeds back into Stage 1. This creates a closed nuclear fuel cycle. The loop closes. Once this 3-stage cycle is fully operational, India's need for imported uranium could fall dramatically. The country could theoretically power its nuclear program almost entirely on thorium, a fuel it holds in extraordinary abundance. India holds approximately 846,000 tons of thorium reserves. nearly one-third of the world's known reserves. Concentrated primarily in Odisha, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu, these deposits could sustain India's nuclear program for up to 400 years. That is not energy security. That is energy sovereignty. Part 5. The $4 billion uranium bet. But thorium reactors are stage 3. Right now in 2026, India is still heavily dependent on stage 1 reactors that run on uranium. And with an aggressive nuclear expansion program underway, India needs a lot more uranium than its domestic production can provide. India's domestic uranium production stands at roughly 400 tons per year. The gap between what India produces and what it needs must be filled by imports, which brings the story to Kazakhstan. In 2026, India signed one of the largest uranium supply agreements in Asian history with Kazatomprom, Kazakhstan's state-controlled uranium company, a deal valued at more than $4 billion. Under the agreement, Kazatomprom will supply India's Department of Atomic Energy, specifically its Directorate of Purchase and Stores, with natural uranium concentrate known as U-308 under a long-term contract. Kazakhstan is the world's largest uranium producer, responsible for approximately 40 to 43% of global uranium mine production. In 2025, Kazatomprom produced 25,800 tons of uranium. Production is projected to increase to between 27,500 and 29,000 tons by the end of 2026. India's deal, based on analyst estimates, involves approximately 110,000 tons of natural uranium concentrate over 10 to 12 years. To put this in historical perspective, in 2009, India signed a Kazakhstan uranium deal covering approximately 2,100 tons. In 2015, a subsequent deal covered approximately 5,000 tons. The 2026 deal covers approximately 110,000 tons. That is not an incremental step. That is a transformation. The deal was so large that Kazatomprom had to convene an extraordinary general meeting of shareholders to approve it. According to reports, 92.9% of shareholders voted in favor. The value of the transaction exceeds 50% of Kazatomprom's total book value, making it one of the most transformative uranium supply agreements in the history of the global nuclear industry. India currently operates 24 nuclear reactors generating around 8.8 gigawatts. The largest are Kudankulam in Tamil Nadu at 2,000 megawatts, Kakrapar in Gujarat at 1,840 megawatts, and Rawatbata in Rajasthan at 1,780 megawatts. Tarapur, Kaiga, Kalpakkam, and Narora add further capacity, but the ambition is 100 gigawatts by 2047, the centenary of India's independence. Between 2031 and 2035 alone, India expects to add 22.5 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity, with projects approved at Gorakhpur in Haryana, Jaipur in Maharashtra, and new NTPC proposed units in Banka, Bihar. All of these reactors will need fuel. The Kazakhstan deal locks in that fuel for the coming decade. When India buys uranium from Western suppliers like Canada, it faces compliance conditions and non-proliferation conditionalities. Kazakhstan, operating as an independent producer, offers India a pathway to secure large volumes without those burdens. India already imports uranium from Canada and Russia. The Kazakhstan deal adds a third major pillar, building the diversified supply chain that insulates the country against any single supplier disruption. The Atomic Energy Regulatory Board of India also granted an operating license to a nuclear fuel complex facility in Kota, Rajasthan, designed to supply fuel to 700 megawatt pressurized heavy water reactors with a licensed capacity of 500 metric tons of natural uranium dioxide fuel bundles annually. India is not just securing supply, it is building the complete chain from imported concentrate to processed reactor fuel. Part 6. The Other Revolution. While nuclear captures the headlines, India's solar revolution has been quietly reshaping the country's electricity landscape. India's solar installed capacity has grown from negligible levels in 2010 to one of the largest solar fleets in the world by 2026. Large solar parks in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu have made India one of the top 5 solar-generating nations globally. But solar has a fundamental limitation that nuclear does not share. The sun does not always shine. At night, solar panels produce nothing. During monsoon season, when clouds cover large parts of the subcontinent for months, solar output falls sharply. This is why India's energy planners have consistently argued that solar and nuclear are not competing options. They are complementary ones. Solar handles the daytime, clear sky generation at low marginal cost. Nuclear handles the baseload, the steady, round-the-clock electricity that keeps the grid stable regardless of weather or time of day. A country that has both is far better positioned than a country that has only one. Part 7. The refining edge. Between crude oil in the ground and petrol in a car's engine lies an industrial process. Refining. India has built one of the largest and most sophisticated refining industries in the world. The crown jewel is the Jamnagar refinery in Gujarat, operated by Reliance Industries. With a total processing capacity of more than 1.24 million barrels per day, Jamnagar is the single largest oil refining complex on Earth at a single location. India's refining overcapacity relative to its domestic consumption has made the country a major exporter of refined petroleum products. When India buys discounted Russian crude and processes it through its world-class facilities, it can sell refined products, diesel, petrol, aviation fuel, petrochemicals, to markets in Europe, the Americas, and Africa at internationally competitive prices. This is sometimes called the Russian oil arbitrage. Buy cheap crude, refine it, sell at market prices. The margin between the discounted input and the market-priced output has been substantial. It means India is not a passive consumer of global energy markets. It is a producer, it is a processor. A country that only imports oil is at the mercy of prices and politics. A country that imports, refines, and exports has options. Part 8. The ask. In the middle of all this strategic maneuvering, the Indian government has sent an unusual message to ordinary Indians. Prime Minister Modi asked citizens to save fuel, reduce unnecessary foreign travel, avoid buying gold unnecessarily, work from home where possible, use carpooling and public transport, shift to electric vehicles, move freight by rail. The reason is straightforward. India needs to protect its foreign exchange reserves during a period of global oil market disruption. Every dollar that leaves to pay for imported oil cannot be used for technology, machinery, or semiconductors. When oil is expensive, India's import bill swells, the rupee comes under pressure, and the economy faces headwinds. The government's ask was essentially help preserve the foreign exchange buffer while long-term infrastructure is built that will reduce this vulnerability permanently. Now, some people asked an obvious question when this announcement was made. If the government is asking citizens to reduce unnecessary foreign travel, then why is Prime Minister Modi himself traveling across the world? The question seems fair on the surface, but it fundamentally misunderstands the difference between personal consumption and strategic diplomacy. When an ordinary Indian tourist travels abroad, money leaves India and stays in foreign economies. It does not come back. It does not generate technology partnerships or build supply chains. When Prime Minister Modi travels abroad, the goal is the precise opposite: to bring long-term strategic value back into India. Technology partnerships, semiconductor investments, energy agreements, supply chain access, defense cooperation, foreign investment flowing in. These are not vacations. They are negotiations over the future positioning of India in the global economy. And that is exactly why visits like Modi's Netherlands trip matter far more than many people realize. The Netherlands controls one of Europe's most important logistical gateways through the port of Rotterdam. It is also home to ASML, headquartered in Eindhoven, the only company in the world that makes extreme ultraviolet lithography machines used to manufacture the most advanced semiconductor chips. Without ASML machines, leading chip makers in Taiwan, South Korea, and the United States cannot produce their most advanced products. In a world where countries are fighting over technology access, chip manufacturing rights, and energy security, India cannot afford to remain absent from these conversations. While ordinary Indians are being asked to reduce unnecessary dollar outflows in the short term, India's leadership is simultaneously working to secure the long-term foundations of economic power itself. These two things are not in contradiction. They are two sides of the same strategic coin. Short-term discipline, long-term ambition. Step back and look at what is coming. The world is moving toward artificial intelligence at a speed that was difficult to predict even 5 years ago. AI systems require enormous computing power. Computing power requires GPU-dense data centers. Data centers require constant, reliable, round-the-clock electricity, not occasional electricity, not intermittent electricity, but power that never stops. For decades, India's nuclear energy sector was restricted entirely to public sector entities. Only the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited could build and operate nuclear plants. Private companies and foreign investors were excluded. In 2026, India updated these rules. Private companies and foreign investors are now permitted to participate in nuclear power projects through joint ventures. This opens the door to both domestic private capital and international technology partners entering a sector previously closed to them. Private sector participation brings capital the government alone cannot provide at this scale. It brings efficiency, competition, and foreign technology partnerships, particularly from American, French, South Korean, and Canadian nuclear firms, that can accelerate India's development and make the 100 gigawatt target more financially achievable. Stand back now and look at the full picture. Pillar 1, Russian oil. Discounted crude at $10 to $25 per barrel, below benchmark, saving India billions annually while preserving strategic flexibility. Pillar 2, Middle East balancing. Simultaneous energy and diplomatic relationships with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait, ensuring access to one of the world's largest oil-producing regions without exclusive dependence. Pillar 3, Strategic reserves. Underground caverns at Visakhapatnam, Mangaluru, and Padur, with new facilities at Chandikol and Padur. Phase 2 expanding the emergency buffer. Pillar 4, Refining dominance. The Jamnagar complex in Gujarat, the largest single-location refinery on Earth, converting cheap imported crude into valuable exported products. Pillar 5, Solar growth. One of the world's top solar nations, providing low-cost daytime electricity across the country. Pillar 6, Nuclear expansion. From the Kalpakkam Breeder Reactor milestone in April 2026 to the $4 billion Kazakhstan uranium deal to the 100 gigawatt target for 2047, building baseload electricity independent of fossil fuel markets. Pillar 7, Thorium ambitions. 846,000 tons of reserves in a three-stage nuclear cycle designed to harness them, powering the country for up to 400 years. Most countries depend on one or two critical energy pillars. India is trying to build all of them simultaneously. This is rare, not because it is impossible, but because it requires long-term thinking, institutional capacity, diplomatic skill, industrial policy, and scientific ambition that few nations can sustain over the decades required. India is sustaining it. All of them together, built over time and managed intelligently, could make India one of the most energy-independent major economies on the planet. In the history of modern nations, it is unusual to find a country simultaneously pursuing energy independence across as many dimensions as India is pursuing in 2026. Most countries make a choice. Oil states build their economies on fossil fuel exports and remain hostage to the global market price. European nations opted for Russian gas pipelines and paid a devastating price when the Ukraine war disrupted them in 2022. Japan chose nuclear power and then retreated from it after the Fukushima disaster of March 2011. India has chosen something different, to be neither wholly dependent nor wholly self-sufficient, but to build multiple layers of resilience simultaneously. To buy cheap Russian oil while building nuclear plants, to expand solar while signing uranium deals, to process foreign crude through world-class refineries while planning a thorium future, to ask citizens for short-term discipline while negotiating long-term strategic partnerships abroad. It does not always look coherent from the outside, but when viewed across the decades, it reveals a country thinking about its energy future, in ways that very few others are. A country of 1.4 billion people cannot afford to think small. It cannot afford to depend on one pillar, one supplier, one choke point, one technology, one fuel source. It needs everything. And it is building everything. Russian oil, Middle East balancing, nuclear expansion, solar growth, refining dominance, strategic reserves, thorium ambitions, breeder reactors, energy diversification. Most countries depend on one or two critical energy pillars. India is trying to build all of them simultaneously. That is rare. And that rarity, that ambition at that scale, may be the most important thing to understand about India's place in the 21st century. Not just a large economy, not just a growing market, not just a demographic giant, but a country that is quietly, deliberately, and with extraordinary patience, building the foundations of genuine strategic power. The energy empire is under construction. The world is just beginning to notice.